And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the College Sports Hive. We are thrilled to be here with you on this Wednesday for our football recap, preview, and news, all included. Might be here for a while, but that's all right. We got a lot to cover and a lot to bring you. This is the week of conference championships for all of the teams, so chock full of fantastic games. We'll start off today talking about some news. We will list out what all of those conference championships are, as they all have been locked into place. We'll give another recap of our Heisman Trophy race for all of you thus far through 15 weeks of play, heading into the 16th week. We'll have another episode coming out on Sunday for football that'll recap what happened during the conference championship games, and you'll see some pretty concrete playoff scenarios happen after this weekend. So we'll be bringing you all of those that we can think of. So that's going to be a fun one as well on Sunday. And the last little bit of news is our fourth college football playoff rankings were released last night, so some changes to touch on there. We'll recap Florida being upset by LSU at home last weekend, as well as Miami kind of being uncompetitive at home again against North Carolina. So two interesting games to recap there quickly, and then we'll move on to 7 incredible previews for everyone. We have Clemson versus Notre Dame, the game that everyone can't wait to see. Alabama versus Florida, Ohio State, Northwestern, Iowa State, Oklahoma, Oregon, USC, Tulsa, Cincinnati, and Louisiana versus Coastal Carolina. So some incredible conference championships. And with that being said, why not start anywhere better than how we did last week, the two of us? I went 6-2, and Leaf went 5-3, so I got another game up on him.
I shouldn't have taken Navy. That was a ballsy pick, but I sent it.
Army got it done for me, so I'm now only down 1 heading into conference championships. I'm looking forward to that. 39-23 overall. Leaf is 40-22. So we're still looking pretty good overall, and he's got 1 to play with heading into this massive week of games. We're going to pick 11 games later on in this episode for you, so make sure to be ready for those. Can't miss stuff there for sure. So we touched on, we're going to tell you what the conference championships are, and why not start with anywhere other than the Big Ten? We have Northwestern representing the West and Ohio State representing the East. So the Big Ten kind of did. We touched on, are they going to fluctuate their preferences, their guidelines, things like that to allow Ohio State to play? Yes, that was the case. So a 5-game Ohio State team is playing for the Big Ten championship game instead of Indiana. What do you think about that?
I think it's right because they beat Indiana. I think that's okay, because then if the other team were to have not played them, maybe I would have been more peeved by it. But I think it's right that Ohio State gets a chance, just because they are one of the best teams in college football and there were extenuating circumstances. So I'm okay with it. Obviously, you'd like them to play the full schedule and get the games needed, and maybe that will hurt them in the actual college football rankings. But I think I'm happy with them being in the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, to take that even one step further, Indiana's dealing with COVID issues on their own side of things. Their game this weekend against Purdue is canceled, as well as Maryland is dealing with COVID issues. So they would be the next 2 teams to represent the Big Ten East. And if they can't play in that Big Ten championship game, it's sliding all the way down to somehow Penn State, who has a chance to go to 4-5, would be playing representing the Big Ten East. Which would just be nuts, and no one wants to see that at this point in time, a Big Ten championship game between 3-5 Penn State and Northwestern. So I think it's absolutely the right move to put Ohio State into this game and have them have another big test before to bolster their resume for a potential college football playoff berth. Moving on to the Big 12, Iowa State is playing Oklahoma. That's just there's no divisions in the Big 12. That's just the number 1 seed versus the number 2 seed after all the games. So that's pretty clear cut there. That's going to take place in Jerry's World, AT&T Stadium down in Dallas. So a really good one that we'll have a preview for as well. The SEC title game is going to be Florida, even though they lost last week, representing the East, versus Alabama, representing the West. So this is another tremendous game that we're all looking forward to, and going to have high-powered offense throughout this one, in my opinion. The can't-miss game of the week, in my opinion, is Notre Dame versus Clemson. There's the 2 best teams in the ACC. What do you make of this matchup real quickly before we get into the preview later on?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest matchup in all of college football this season. I said that before they played the regular season, and now that this could be an eliminator. or it could just determine all the rankings in the college football playoff, and both are likely. So yeah, this is awesome. This is an awesome matchup. One of the best defenses in college football versus one of the best offenses. So a lot to look forward to in that one.
It's going to be great. We'll have a full-length preview of that one for you later on as well as another preview for surprising Oregon taking the berth for the Pac-12 North against USC, who's undefeated to represent the Pac-12 South. And pretty much what people are talking, they have a considerable shot to a 50% chance to make the college football playoff, surprisingly, out of some odds that I've seen. So a big game here for USC. Washington was originally scheduled to play because that Oregon-Washington game wasn't able to happen. And then Washington was not able to due to COVID issues. So Oregon was thrust into the fold to take on USC and play for a Pac-12 title, which is quite frankly kind of astounding. What do you make of that switch, and what are you anticipating for this game?
I was really fortunate for Oregon, obviously. They've lost their last two games, then missed a game. And now they're in the Pac-12 title game. That's probably not the way they wanted to script it up to get there, but I guess they're there. And this is an interesting game because there's just a lot of talent on both sides of the ball that seems unfulfilled. Even though USC is 5-0, they've played a bunch of squeakers, and they've played great football in the last 7 minutes of the game, but haven't played phenomenally through the first 53. And I feel like that Oregon has the talent possessed that could trouble USC, and maybe this time, this fifth time, sixth time doesn't work out. So they could play spoiler even though they're not supposed to be there. So it's an interesting matchup because it's two of the biggest brands in the Pac-12 battling out for maybe a playoff spot, I guess.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I don't think Oregon necessarily has a shot in that, but USC surely has a say in what's happening there. And in terms of the Pac-12's berth, I don't really think that's even possible if you ask me personally. So those are going to be the Power 5 conference championships. We'll also give you the Group of 5 conference championships. Let's start in the American. We have Tulsa, ranked number 23, taking on Cincinnati, who's fallen again to number 9. That's going to take place in the American. The Sun Belt is Louisiana versus Coastal Carolina. We'll have previews of both of those games, seeing as they're ranked matchups. And then the Mountain West, Boise State is playing undefeated San Jose State. So shout out to the Spartans there. The MAC is Ball State versus Buffalo. Buffalo is also undefeated on the season. And then the Conference USA Championship is the UAB Blazers taking on We Are Marshall. So some interesting games in the Group of 5. We'll pick the Boise State, San Jose State, Ball State, Buffalo, and UAB Marshall games, but we won't give previews of those. So with that being said, those are the conference championships. A lot to look forward to this weekend. It's going to be fantastic. We'll get to our previews here in a minute, but first things first, let's touch on your top 5 right now for your Heisman Trophy finalists.
Yeah, no, I put some thought into this, and I kind of ended up going with what I think the ranking is, not necessarily my own personal one. I think it's Mac Jones, number 1, Devontae Smith, number 2, Kyle Trask, number 3, Najee Harris, number 4, and Trevor Lawrence, number 5. I think that we've talked about how Najee Harris is the best player offensively, and it could actually be Devontae Smith for Alabama. But I've seen that the Heisman is a quarterback-driven award. So I kind of decided to go with what I think will be the rankings of it by when it's all said and done. Obviously, there's still time to go and performances that could sway it, but that's kind of what I think the hierarchy is. But I might have Najee or Devontae above Mac Jones in my personal ranking.
Yeah, I think I went with a slightly different approach. I think I went with what I would want to see in what happens, and I have Najee Harris actually number 1, Devontae Smith number 2. They're both on the same offense for Alabama. Kyle Trask coming in at number 3, Mac Jones all the way down at 4. He is the quarterback for Alabama, and Trevor Lawrence at 5. So with that being said, I think the only time I've ever seen 3 players in the same Heisman Trophy finalist thing is an NCAA 14 for the Xbox. Like, it's just when you have a dynasty and you're just rolling through people. This is just unheard of things to have 3 of the best players and most deserving people for this award being on the same offense. And I think if you go either Najee Harris, Devontae Smith, or Mac Jones, you're not picking a wrong player. I just think just think it's hard to say that Mac Jones is deserving when I don't necessarily think he's the best player on their offense. So that's kind of what my reasoning went with. I know it's a quarterback-driven award. I just hope to see that mold broken this year. So I would say that's why I put Najee Harris and Devontae Smith 1 and 2, and I still think Kyle Trask has a better resume than Mac Jones. So that's kind of my reasoning there. And then I think go ahead.
I agree. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna change gears. So to follow up.
Well, I was gonna say I think Kyle Trask has been the best quarterback in the nation, in my opinion. I just think that there's too much weight individually, like in an individual award on winning, and that's obviously not individually based, and they contribute. So I agree. I think if I were to do my own personal ones, I'd put Najee, Devontae, and Trask ahead of Jones. So I think we're on the same page there. It's interesting that we both have Ian Book on the next tier and Justin Fields as well. Just guys that are in position to make the playoff, and so winning doesn't necessarily mean that they're in. And so I just think that Mac Jones' stats are so prolific, even with the players he has on the outside, that gives him a boost over those guys. And it's just one thing I wanted to add there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where I was going to go with it, is that next tier level of players. We have the same 4 in Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, Breece Hall, and Ian Book in no particular order. You could slot those in at any place, and you're not having a wrong discussion. Ian Book's played tremendous this season. So is Zach Wilson and Justin Fields. Justin Fields just doesn't have the sample size that some of these other quarterbacks do. Breece Hall is a name that you don't necessarily hear a lot of, but he's a tremendous running back for Iowa State. He's having a fantastic season statistically, and he makes that offense go. So he needs to be in the conversation for sure. I just don't think he's there over Najee Harris at this point in time either. So that's why he's kind of in that next tier of players for me as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. One I'm surprised, I just wanted to add in, is I'm surprised Travis Etienne hasn't been as heavily featured this year after back-to-back ACC Player of the Years this season. He's not even in the top 9 that we have listed here. And I'm surprised just because I thought entering this season he was the best running back, and Najee Harris has kind of taken the reins for that. And then Breece Hall passed Chuba Hubbard as well. So I just wanted to give a little Doak Walker shout out. Those are probably your 4 finalists there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super interesting because Chuba Hubbard actually opted out for the rest of the season for Oklahoma State. I don't know why I couldn't think. I don't know why I couldn't think there. Oklahoma State. So they're without their best player I think they have one more game this week, if not for a potential bowl berth for Oklahoma State there for sure. So interesting. Another tidbit of news that didn't make the document, but is warranting discussion. With that being said, the college football playoff rankings did drop last night. Same top 5 as we've seen the first 3. Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Clemson, Texas A&M are all slotted in there 1 through 5. Iowa State actually bumped up 1 to the number 6 spot, and Florida, after their loss, only dropped 1 down to 7. Georgia, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma in that order make out the rest of the top 10. And then Indiana, Coastal Carolina, and USC are 11 through 13. So some interesting things there. What do you make of this top 13? We kind of limited away a while back of 13 teams having a chance to make the playoff. I think if you draw that line around 13 again, I still think you can eliminate some of these teams ahead of USC.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that Georgia is a really good football team, but they had 2 losses and aren't playing for a title game. So you can effectively eliminate them. You can eliminate Cincinnati, unfortunately, because the committee has shown that not playing the games has hurt them a lot, because they fell from 7 to 9 without doing anything wrong, and teams ahead of them, such as Florida, just lost in a game they should have won. I think in the same boat, you can probably eliminate Florida. Even if they beat Alabama, that's 2 losses and 1 against a particularly bad LSU team, and Texas A&M had already beaten Florida. So that eliminates that there. I think Iowa State and Oklahoma, there's a chance. I think the winner of that, you have a slim chance that they like winning the division over a Texas A&M team if there were to be an upset in those. And then Indiana, I think because they're not playing for a title game, and Coastal Carolina is the same issue with Cincinnati. So I think you only really are between 6 or 7 teams here. And it's an unfortunate way, just because of the way this season is, that some of these teams are eliminated by no fault of their own, such as Cincinnati.
Yeah, it's tough to see for sure. Other notable notes that have happened in this ranking is Miami fell 8 spots from 10 to 18 after losing by nearly 40 at home to North Carolina. With that being said, North Carolina jumped up 2 spots after that big win. And shout out San Jose State. We'll pick their game in the Mountain West Conference championship. Excuse me. They're ranked for the first time this season, sliding in at number 24 as they're undefeated on the season. So shout out to them. And then Colorado, after their first loss this season, is still ranked at number 25. That is the only other Pac-12 school that is ranked besides USC. So clearly some indication on how the committee's viewing this Pac-12 division and league in whole. So I think that's an interesting note to make as well. 2 major coaching changes that happened this past week was Kevin Sumlin was fired from Arizona after losing to Arizona State 70-7. Pretty big blowout there that took place on Friday night. I just think you can't really lose to your in-state rival by 60 plus and expect to keep your job, especially after having a losing record after 3 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, his writing was on the wall, and I think there was a chance you could have chalked this one up to COVID, and then he got absolutely blasted. So I think that was just kind of the final straw, and the straw that broke the camel's back there. But I don't think he was necessarily safe, even if it had been like a win. Even if it had been a win, I don't know if that would have saved him. I think the writing was on the wall, and in an elongated season, he might have even fared worse. So. But, I mean, that was a big-time money deal from Arizona too. So we'll see where they go from this one. And that's a program that was on the rise and has started to fall again.
Speaking of big-time money deals, Gus Malzahn was fired by Auburn, even though he had a $21.7 million buyout. So they basically, for everyone that doesn't know what that means, they paid him $21.7 million to not be their football coach anymore for the next foreseeable few years. What do you make of this move by Auburn? And I haven't really heard where they're trying to go with their hiring decisions. And I'm just not sure what else is out there for them currently as of right now to replace this guy who let's be honest has been good but not great.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with expectations of Auburn. I mean, when he came in, he took over for Gene Chizik, and they had good success. But in the SEC, you expect great things, and you have to battle with their main rival being Nick Saban's Alabama. And so I think a lot of that is expectations being through the roof and those being underwhelmed. But, I mean, 21.7 to pay him for firing him, I would have assumed that they wouldn't have been like, oh, you're that bad. We need to get rid of you for that much money. It just speaks to an abundance of wealth in that program. And they must have someone in mind because – like we said, he's done a good job. He just hasn't done a great job. And so I guess sometimes, in my opinion, sometimes the grass isn't always greener on the outside. So I'm curious to see who they bring in, if they had someone in mind when making that move, because he's obviously proven he could win games. I mean, he's beaten Alabama a few times since he's taken over, and not many teams can say they have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of similar to talks of what Penn State was thinking around James Franklin when they started 0-5 on their season, but he had like a $23 million buyout, I think. So they have won 3 games since. I think his job's kind of safe for the meantime at least. But interesting news here with Gus Malzahn and Auburn. $21.7 million is a huge chunk of change to give someone to not coach your team anymore. So can't state that enough. And then let's move on to one of the recaps that will bring you, keeping in the SEC, is that a major thing happened last weekend was number 6 Florida was upset 37-34 at home. Let's talk about this LSU team. They came into the game with a record of 3-5. They only traveled 54 scholarship players to this game due to COVID issues with people in contact tracing and people out for the game. They were 23-point underdogs, starting their 3rd different quarterback, a true freshman, Max Johnson, and they're missing their best defender, Derek Stingley, all in this game alone, to go travel to the number 6 team in the country who's blown a lot of people out, and then you go out and win. So I think this is a tremendous performance by LSU. Max Johnson was 21 of 36 for 239 yards, 3 touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over in his first ever start in the Swamp. So that's kudos to you for that. That's an incredible game. What do you make of this upset, and what happens now with Florida?
Well, I think it exposed that Florida was more of a pretender than a contender in the grand scheme of things, just because their defense has been susceptible and they were finally beaten. The one thing I'll say is that LSU regardless of how they've played, they have tons of talent that cause issues for any team, and the talent shined through even though they were shorthanded. I think that could have been a helpful thing in this game, causing them to play like, hey, we got nothing to lose, let's go play spoiler, rather than the expectations of defending a championship last year with all those guys who won the championship being gone. I think those caused unfair expectations and may have played extra pressure in for Miles Brennan, and then forgot who came in for him after that, but TJ Finley. But I just think that, there's no expectations for them to win this game. They brought in only 54 players. A lot of them were getting their first game action, and it was obviously a great job, and maybe Florida underwhelmed as well. But I think they played with nothing to lose, and that reckless abandon could sometimes bring great results, and that's what it did in this one. And obviously Florida didn't play their best game, but you got to give credit where credit's due. And LSU, the players who did play, came out and played.
Absolutely. This was a super back and forth game to start off with. Kyle Trask threw 2 interceptions early that allowed LSU to play with a ton more confidence. One of those picks was for a touchdown for the LSU defense, so that helped them out tremendously there. A couple crazy tip ball interception along the sideline. I don't know if any of you have seen the replay, but that was pretty nuts as well. So it's definitely some fortune for this LSU defense to take some drives away from Kyle Trask, but he did end up finishing the game with 474 passing yards, 2 touchdowns to go along with those 2 early interceptions. So a tremendous bounce back late in this game to keep Florida in it, because truth be told, LSU had all the momentum around the halftime in the second quarter, and then Trask was able to come out and lead their team back into this game and with a chance to win. But something dramatic happened to take that away. An understatement of the year is dramatic. The iconic shoe toss is how I have it labeled on our document. Let me run you through this real quick. So the game was tied at 34. A couple minutes left to play. Florida had all the momentum. LSU came up short on 3rd down with a dump down to their tight end. Florida rallied and made the tackle. With that being said, Florida's defensive player that made the tackle, quarterback number 3, Marco Wilson, made the play. And this would have had plenty of time to give your ball back to Trask, move the ball down the field, try and go win the game. He somehow ended up with the shoe of the tight end. And instead of just maybe, dropping it and giving it back to the guy, he decides to throw it as far as he can down the field. And it ended up going 20 yards downfield through the fog, because it was super foggy at this point in time during the game. No one really knew what happened, but fortunately one of the refs saw that happen and called a 15-yard unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on Wilson. So this extends the drive for LSU as they were about to punt and gives them the chance to continue to move the ball down the field. They eventually go down and kick a 57-yard field goal through the fog, split the uprights. An incredible kick by Cade York. Shout out to him. Special teams makes a difference. I love plugging that. Trask gets the time to go lead his team back. They get into field goal range, and then Evan McPherson hooked one wide left from equally as far. Granted, it was a really long kick through the fog, and the Tigers were able to pull the upset as time expired. What the heck do you make of all of that at the iconic shoe toss?
Well, I mean, it just was – it was silly, first of all, but you didn't expect the ramifications even of that, like, because 57 yards is still a heck of a kick, and so that makes that, and obviously it's like, oh God, he just lost us the game, he ruined our season, and so I feel bad for the guy, because I mean it's just one stupid mistake, and obviously you don't really think about that. Doesn't really happen ever. Like I've seen in the NBA a shoe come off and some guy like chuck it at the ball or something. But these are like pro athletes not really caring at this point. It's their money. But this one, it was stunning to see him just grab the thing and chuck it with reckless abandon. And I think this week will be interesting. I have this theory that I'm pretty sure Marco Wilson is going to be guarding Devontae Smith, and that's not a really nice welcome. I have a feeling he's going to come up with a big play in this game, and at least Florida fans will be like, oh, he's all right now in our eyes. So I'm kind of rooting for him. Yeah, I feel really badly for him because really that type of play may have eliminated them from college football playoff contention. But the moral of the story is don't throw your opponent's shoe.
Yeah, I mean it's something that you would think you wouldn't have to teach to one of these kids, but like I think you hit the nail on the head. Just downright silly. I think it's one of those things you can easily look back on once the result happened to be like, oh, that's the reason why that happened. And like you had the notorious camera on him, head in his hands on the bench as soon as the Florida kicker missed. So like it's easy to have him be the scapegoat, but there was a lot of things that Florida could have done differently throughout the course of the game to take that scenario away. Just an really interesting play that really hurt Florida's chances of winning this game and potentially getting a berth into the college football playoff, unfortunately. So I have to ask this question. Just for my sanity, at least, we touched on how LSU was looking coming into this game at 3-5, 54 scholarship players, 23-point underdogs, third string QB, true freshman, no Derek Stingley. This happens with the shoe toss, and they lose the game, and they only fall one spot in the college football playoff rankings. How are they still ranked number 7 after all of that happens?
I don't know. I think that was my biggest takeaway from the rankings as well. Just that you fall one spot for a bad loss at home and with all the implications to go. I mean, I guess the college football playoff may not pay attention to like, oh, they could make it and them losing should hurt them more. But I mean, Cincinnati's done nothing to hurt themselves, and now they're at 9. Georgia wins some meaningless games essentially and passes them. But Florida loses an extremely meaningful game that they should have won. They were 23-point favorites, as you said, and only falls one. It baffles me. Maybe they have some strength of schedule stuff that could help Florida's case and keep them at 7. But I don't know. Based off my takeaway and understanding of how rankings work, usually when a loss that bad happens, you're going to fall. And they didn't really. So I'm a little surprised, and I wonder what it means down the road. Like, do they have a chance? And we just don't know because they're still at 7. And I mean, that's a puncher's chance.
Yeah, it's super interesting because you look at their last few weeks of work as well, and they're not necessarily spectacular. Tennessee 31-19. I forget exactly who they played before that, but they competed in that game as well. And so it's just you look at that, and their biggest win their only other loss is to Texas A&M, who's been struggling recently. So I think you look at these things and these contributing factors, and yes, I was surprised they lost to LSU. I was expecting them to just get kind of blown out by Alabama and have that be like, oh, they were just a pretender, as you kind of said it. But with this surprise of an upset, I think you've seen it impact potential playoff contenders a lot more than you've seen it impact this Florida team, especially 1 week before you're going to play for a conference championship. I mean, I'm just a little bit baffled at how they're still up at number 7. I'm not going to harp on it for too long because it's out of my control. But if I were formulating the rankings, I would have had them below some of the other teams that have looked a lot better, in my opinion. I'll just leave it at that. A team that looked really good was North Carolina in their top 20 matchup, and they laid it on Miami at home, and they beat the Hurricanes 62-26 in this top 20 matchup. Let me read you some of these stats and hear your takes on them. North Carolina, total yards 778, first downs 31, time of possession 41 minutes and 49 seconds in comparison to 19 minutes and 41 seconds for Miami. 554 yards of rushing offense. Michael Carter and Javonte Williams both had over 20 carries. Carter had 308 yards and 2 touchdowns. Williams had 236 yards and 3 touchdowns, both averaging over 10 yards a carry. What the heck happened with that Miami defense?
I mean, I don't know the answer to the extent of what we saw. I mean, 800 yards almost. That's absurd. That's like you could go 3 games and not give up 800.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, I will say that we both predicted North Carolina would win because Miami's defense was a little shorthanded, based on some players that opted out or were injured. But still, like this is a team that was ranked number 10 entering that game, and to give up 800 yards essentially is mind-boggling. Like this game was never close, never had a chance, and it really is just one good job North Carolina. They kept the pedal to the metal and have finished out their season nicely because they played some close games. They played Notre Dame really well. tied 17-17.5. And I think they proved that they're on the rise under Mac Brown. And I think this was a statement game of theirs, and maybe Miami didn't have the same motivation. But yeah, no, I was baffled by those numbers. Like I had already seen them, and when you were reading them off, I just couldn't help but like say under my breath, like, oh my God, that's not possible. But it happened, but I don't know how to explain it. Like that's inexplicable.
Yeah, it's really surprising as well, in my opinion. I just think it was a great performance from North Carolina. We touched on their explosiveness on the offensive side of the ball in a few of their previews. Let's not forget that if Notre Dame hadn't committed to an ACC schedule and being a part of the ACC conference this year, this would have been for the right to play Clemson in that ACC championship game. So this was a huge game for both schools. It's basically a third place game in the ACC. So to see that kind of lackluster performance from Miami was very, very surprising, and honestly a little bit disheartening if I were in the Miami camp. I'm very surprised they didn't fall further in the rankings as well, because they were just flat out uncompetitive in this game. It was ugly early. And so just with that being said, a really kudos to North Carolina for a great performance. And if I'm a Miami fan, I'm scratching my head for sure as to what the heck happened in that matchup. So a really interesting one to touch on there in a top 20 matchup that took place last weekend. So all that was last weekend. We have now come to one of the best weekends in college football I think I can personally remember, and just some incredible conference championships to touch on. We're going to preview 7 games, as we touched on, so a lot to get to. So why not start anywhere other than the best one of the bunch? Number 2, Notre Dame versus number 3, Clemson in the ACC championship game. Charlotte, North Carolina, 4 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Okay, I feel like we need to take like a breath or something. Clemson has a 70.7% chance to win this game. The line set at 10.5 in favor of Clemson, seeing as Notre Dame won this first matchup as to why they're undefeated on their season and the number 2 team in the country. But Trevor Lawrence is back. That is the massive but in this game, and I think that's the best place to start in this preview. What do you think the difference is with that dude on the field?
I think DJ has incredible skills that we talked about multiple times on this, but it's just Trevor Lawrence is so poised and has such a command of the playbook, like just a leader of that team, that it inspires some of their players to play better, both in terms of performance that he contributes to and just in general mood. And then I think he's not faster than DJ. He just has more command of when to pull on the read option. We saw him against Ohio State last year in the biggest stage go for 67-yard touchdown with his legs when he's not throwing well. And then we saw him throw and torch an Alabama defense as a true freshman. So he's got it all. He's been there. He's done that. He's played in the biggest stage, and he's succeeded at every stage. He's got one loss ever, and that was to LSU in the championship, and that wasn't really fault of his own. Just Joe Burrow's offense killed their defense, and that was kind of how that game played. And then so I think it's just that the continuity with the defense just provides another element of dynamism, and their offense just gets so much better. And their offense getting better provides juice for their defense, which I thought lacked in that last game. I think that Clemson didn't play a great defensive game, and Ian Book played well, so credit to him. But I just think that the feeling of the team when he's playing is different. And in my opinion, I've said this before, he's the best player in college football. He's going to be the number 1 pick. So I just think that he makes all the difference in the world, even though DJ is a great quarterback.
Yeah, I think one of the massive things to touch on here in terms of Trevor Lawrence instead of DJ is the fact that Clemson had 4 turnovers in that game against Notre Dame. And Notre Dame only had the 1, and it still went to double overtime. So with that being said, Clemson was still in this game despite turning the ball over that much. And I just think Trevor Lawrence kind of takes a little bit of that away from Clemson. I'm not saying DJ necessarily was the reason that all of those turnovers happened. I just think having your leader, having your guy out on the field influences everyone else to up their level of play just a little bit further and a little bit more cohesiveness. And in terms of you don't see a handling of an exchange between ETN and Trevor Lawrence very often at all. And that caused the touchdown for Notre Dame the last time these two teams played. So with that being said, I just think there's some intricacies in having Trevor Lawrence in this matchup that's going to be huge and much different around. And I think that's why you're seeing this Clemson spread of 10.5 in favor of the Tigers over when Notre Dame won this first matchup. So I think that's a huge point to make in this one, is just having his leadership there for that. But let's flip the script and talk about the Notre Dame leadership, because Ian Book is having a tremendous season, and he has really turned it around. He's 181 of 286, 2,382 yards. But what impresses me the most is 15 TDs in terms of 2 interceptions. He's really taking care of the ball, and that's really been the difference between this Notre Dame team this year and of years past with Ian Book at the helm.
Yeah, and his legs scrambling, knowing when to scramble. I think his just maturity is what's made the biggest difference, both in terms of ball control and touchdown to interception and ratio, and just knowing what to do when. I think that sometimes in past years he was uncertain, and this year they always have a good run game. They always can rely on that, and then his throws were kind of like they lacked a lot of what made big plays. And now this year there are some big plays, both with his legs on some bootlegs or dumping it off, or he knows what to do when. Situationally, they're great. Their defense is maybe the best in college football that has a claim to winning anything. I think they have a legitimate claim of being the best overall. Their linebackers are awesome. But Ian Book is what makes this team go. Like against Clemson, we talked about it the first time, he has to play the game of his life for them to win, and he did, and then they did. So I think the same goes for them. If they want to win this game, one, they should use the set that they're underdogs as bulletin board material, because they won the game against Clemson. I know Trevor Lawrence wasn't playing, but they need to use that as bulletin board material, get everyone fired up. This is a huge game. Then they just need Ian Book to play one of his best games, if not his best game of his career, to win this game. And always rely on your run and stuff. But Ian Book is essential. He has to make big plays, not just game manager plays in this one.
I think another aspect of this, another level to this, is the running back play for both teams. You have Kyren Williams, who sneakily has over 1,000 yards already on the season on only 180 carries, 12 touchdowns. This dude's been a monster. As much as Ian Book has improved this year, Kyren Williams is really having a tremendous season. He's been physical, he's been fast, and he's really been a difference to this Notre Dame offense. To establish him is huge against Clemson, because I don't think Ian Book's necessarily going to be able to just go out and win this game alone with his arm. I think his legs it helps him have a chance with that, but they were able to establish Kyren Williams in this first matchup, and I think that was a huge statement game for him. And I think his performance in this is going to have another huge factor. And we've touched on Travis Etienne for on the flip side with Clemson, is he's having what you would consider a down year for him, with only 758 yards and 12 touchdowns. I just think his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield, as we love to touch on, is going to be huge. These two guys are just going to be massive in this game, and whoever can utilize their second best player, in my opinion, because I would say Book and Lawrence are their best players, and then these two guys are their second best. I think whoever utilizes these two guys better is going to have a tremendous chance to win this game.
Yeah, for sure. And I like my matchups mostly in basketball, but one that I touched on the first time in this was Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah playing against Travis Etienne. And in the first one, Notre Dame won that matchup. They're linebackers, I should say, but he was kind of used as the spy. He was the one who returned that fumble and the mishap for the touchdown. And then as for Clemson, I'm curious to see how Brett Venables, the defensive coordinator for Clemson, schemes to make Kyren Williams not kill them, and how many people do they put in the box, and how worried are they about Ian Book beating them over the top, or Ian Book's legs. I'm curious to see if they spy Book and then put like 7 people in the box and say, hey, beat us with your arm, because you're not going to beat us running the ball, even though your offensive line's great every year. So I'm really intrigued by the coordinator matchups, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and then the individual between Etienne and Owusu-Koramoah.
Yeah, I think those matchups, like you touched on, are massive. And I think you hit the nail on the head is how is this Clemson defense going to change from what they did in that first matchup? Because they gave up a lot of points to this Notre Dame team, and they quite frankly ran the ball on them with ease. So I think you have to take a page out of that game and say, okay, we have to take this away. If we take that away and make Ian Book beat you, quite frankly, I think your chances are better. But with that being said, Ian Book's been surprising people all year long, and I would not bet against him either. So I've been really impressed with him, and I just think it's going to be really interesting to see how Clemson kind of disguises some pressures, some blitz packages, and mixes up their coverages to to allow free people to A, rush the passer, and B, stop the run. So I think if you can do two of those things, both of those things are going to have a lot of success, but I think you have to do one of them at least significantly well in this one to be able to slow down this Notre Dame offense.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think that if Clemson wants to win, they have to be able to stop the run and make Ian Book play extraordinarily if they're going to be beaten. And then the same goes for Notre Dame. They're going to have to adjust their schemes to match Trevor Lawrence being there because that's a completely different team with Trevor Lawrence playing when he's not versus when he's not.
Absolutely. This is going to be an absolutely tremendous game. Once again, this game kicks off at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We could probably take up all the time that we're going to take with all of these previews with just this one alone. I guarantee you it's going to be Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Ballard calling this one at 4 p.m. On ABC. That's the ACC title game. A ton on the line. College football playoff berths, college football playoff seeding and rankings is huge as well, determining what matchup you're going to get and with the other teams that make it. So just so much on the line for both of these teams. It's going to be a tremendous one, no doubt. Transitioning on to just they keep coming. I'm going to just say each one's a tremendous matchup. But number 1 Alabama versus number 7 Florida. It's going to be the SEC championship game. Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. This Alabama's had a lot of success here over the years. 8 p.m. Eastern kickoff on CBS. The current spread is Alabama -17. I honestly think that could be a little generous in terms of Florida aspect of things, considering headline news is that Jalen Waddle is apparently back for this Alabama team, surprisingly.
Jalen Waddle is dynamic, but I mean, I just think that Alabama, no matter who they have, is going to put up points. So the question really is who can get stops in this game? Like, can a team get stops? Like, I think the over-under is about 74 points, and I'd honestly take the over. Like, I mean, Alabama is averaging 49 points per game, and Florida I think it's around 42. So, I mean, that's ridiculous. We'll see who can get stops. And I think, like you said, that it's generous to Florida in some ways. But in the same sense, Florida can put up just as many points. They just need to be able to get a stop. And I don't know if they can do that, considering that Alabama can, 1, throw to beat you, and 2, they have Najee Harris to run to beat you. So there's just too many weapons to take away. And I think that's the difference in this game is that Alabama's defense is on the up and up versus compared to where they started, and Florida's defense has plateaued at being bad.
Oh man, I love it. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you though. I think Alabama's defense has just increased each week. They looked terrible against Ole Miss, and Nick Saban, quite frankly, knew that. And so giving up that many points to Ole Miss is bad. And then they've come back and had different schemes and better performances week in and week out. So I just think 17 is very generous in terms of this Florida team, but they have Kyle Trask. They have that guy on the other side of the field that can score. Let's read his stat line once again because it never gets old. 259 of 369 passing attempts, 3,717 yards, and 40 touchdowns. This dude is just, quite frankly, having a tremendous college football season, and I think he definitely lost a little bit in terms of the Heisman Trophy candidacy last week. But with that being said, he can still score points on anyone.
I think if Trask had won that game, even if it had been 37-34 the opposite way, that Trask would be still number 1. I just think that there's too much tied to winning, especially when you're on a good team. Like there have been exceptions, like Lamar Jackson's team was decent, but not on a high-level winning team. But he was just so dominant. Whereas this year, there's more teams that have a great player. In Alabama's case, they have 3 out of the top 5. But yeah, Trask has the chance in this game. Hey, if you can keep his team in it, I don't want it. There's no one I'd less rather play in a 2-minute drill than Trask this year. I mean, if this game comes down to a final possession, I really do believe it's the team with the ball. So a lot of this difference is who can come up with more stops early and then gain extra possessions. You can't have turnovers either way because these teams put up ridiculous numbers offensively. So you got to take care of the ball and hope for time of possession to be close if you're Florida, because Alabama can run on you too, and Florida hasn't proven that, even though Dameon Pierce is a good running back.
Yeah, I think you touched on the offensive explosion for sure. I read Kyle Trask's stats, and this is just kind of to build off of what we said about Alabama's stars. Let's just hear some of these real quick. Mac Jones, 217 of 284, 3,321 yards, 27 touchdowns in comparison to 3 interceptions. Tremendous season as well. Najee Harris, 183 carries, over 1,000 yards, 1,084, and 22 touchdowns. Just a machine down on the goal line. And then Devontae Smith, you can't say anything more than what this dude has done. 83 catches, 1,327 yards, and 15 touchdowns. With all that being said, stats don't paint the full picture of this game. It's going to be close. It's going to be offensive, at least for the first half. And I think a huge determination in this game is going to be who can manage the halftime interactions, the halftime gaps better. That's going to sound stupid, but if someone is able to win the coin toss and then defer and still have the final drive of the half, that counts as a stop, essentially. If they can score on their final drive and then they get the ball again coming out of the half, that's technically a stop. So I think it's very interesting and watch out, because that could be 2 free possessions for this Florida team, and that could easily be 14 points. So let's not sleep on this Florida team. I know 17 points is a huge amount, and we're saying it's generous. But with that being said, I think if you're able to manage that difference between 10 minutes left in the second quarter and starting the second half, I think you're going to have a great chance in this one.
Yeah, I mean, Florida, they talked about this in the game against LSU and other games I've seen them play. They almost always defer, which is pretty odd considering you have Kyle Trask. Like you almost feel like, hey, I want to get 7-0 just because that feels like inevitable. But they do defer, and they often go 2 for just they score a touchdown or field goal and then come out and get the ball and score again. That's happened multiple times, and to the point where broadcasts talk about it like this is a Florida strategy. So I think that this coin toss is actually important in this game, because I think Saban would like to do the same thing for Alabama because his team's more than capable as well. And then as for 17 being generous, I think it's just because Alabama's defense is getting better. But I don't think that this game will be uncompetitive. I think the only way it becomes uncompetitive is if there's a turnover on Florida's part, because if they're able to not turn the ball over, even if they're punting, it gives themselves a chance. They just can't shoot themselves in the foot against Alabama. But I do think this game will be competitive. I think that 17 might be generous for Alabama, just because I don't see them putting up 70 as compared to Florida's 45. Like, I mean, it's just that Florida's going to get points, whether they come in garbage time or competitive time. They're going to score.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Once again, that's going to be number 1 Alabama versus number 7 Florida for the SEC championship. They're in Atlanta. 8 p.m. kickoff on CBS. I can, again, pretty much guarantee you that will be Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson on the call there. So that's just an always fun one to have on. That CBS music always just wants me to watch football. I don't know why. But yeah, tremendous game here between 2 powerhouses in the SEC. It's going to be a good one for sure. Moving on to the Big Ten, let's touch on number 3 Ohio State taking on number 14 Northwestern. I guess I can't necessarily guarantee, because Fox does have the Pac-12 championship game on Friday, but this is probably going to be Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt and Jenny Taft calling this one in Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. I don't think they've missed one of those in years. Ohio State opening as huge favorites in this one. I thought Alabama was going to be the biggest favorite on the docket, but Ohio State's actually a 20.5-point favorite here against Northwestern, which I think is pretty fair. Let's be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the Alabama one's slightly generous towards the Crimson Tide, and this one I think is fair just because Northwestern doesn't score very well. They play great defense and they take care of the ball, but Ohio State is electric. They come out and punch you in the mouth right away, and then do it again. So I agree. I think this is fair. But if I'm Northwestern, I'm saying, hey, look, we can beat the big boys. We beat Wisconsin before that. Other people knew there were flaws with Wisconsin that we exposed. Indiana played them close. Let's make Fields uncomfortable. Let's give this a chance. They're 91% favorites. No, like we'll take our odds. You know, I think there's a chance for all these games where, even though they're heavy favorites, and I think it's appropriate, that a Northwestern team can trouble Ohio State. I just don't know how well they can score. I think they can I think they can limit them offensively at least.
Yeah, we've touched on significantly the talent that Ohio State has on offense. Justin Fields, Master T, Chris Olave, and Garrett Wilson, all just tremendous players in their own right. It's a shame we've only gotten to see this team play 5 times, because they all have stats that are jaw-dropping as well. So I think if we saw them play a full schedule, you'd see them in the contention of all of these players that we've talked about already. But with that being said, this Northwestern team is going to have to score, because let's be honest, Ohio State's going to score. So I think if you're Northwestern, how do you think they're going to be able to break down this game and look at it and say, listen, we know Ohio State's probably going to score at least 30 points. We need to get to 30 to feel comfortable in this one. How can you see that happening with this team?
I think the way you have to do it is you're going to have to play ball control. They're going to have to run effectively and then play from the play action. I think that you're going to have to run for 5 yards of carry, which is really tough against the Ohio State team. But in order to gain the traction they need to and be able to score that many points, because like you said, Ohio State's going to hit 30. They almost assuredly will. I think you need to dominate time possession, make Ohio State score quickly if they're going to score, no long drives, and then you're going to take the longest time you can and then score on opportunistic plays, play like a counter puncher's tactic. And I think that's really the only way that they have to not turn the ball over, one, maybe get some opportunistic turnovers two, and then play through the play action, because they're not explosive through the air, but play action, if you stump them, you can get some cheap touchdowns. And I think they got to really hope to do so.
Absolutely. I think most importantly, they need to study Indiana game film. I think they need to study exactly what Indiana did on defense, because let's be honest, that's the most human Justin Fields has looked in probably 2 years against that Indiana secondary. I just think this Northwestern team has to play a flawless football game. They need to get turnovers. They probably need +2 in the turnover differential, which doesn't happen often against this Ohio State team, especially with Peyton Ramsey, who's already thrown 6 interceptions throughout 5-6 games of their season. So that's at least 1 interception a game. So then you're looking at three turnovers a game for Ohio State, and that's you're starting to put some of these stats together, and it's starting to be a more uphill battle each time for Northwestern. But with that being said, they do have Pat Fitzgerald on the sideline, who's a very, very good coach, and he will have some wrinkles ready to be able to score points and create sparks for this team.
Yeah, for sure. I think Pat Fitzgerald is one of the better coaches you can ask to spring an upset. I think he plays a style of football that can trouble teams. I just don't know if it's going to be enough against this Ohio State team that really knows that they have to make a statement, because they could go undefeated here and not make it. I mean, it's possible, just based on the weight. I think it's unlikely that that's the case, but they have to make a statement. They can't eke out this game. And so I think it'll be a really tough battle for Northwestern to try to beat the Buckeyes when they're playing for their playoff life.
Absolutely. This is a tremendously big game for Ohio State, because this is their opportunity to go to 6-0, have that conference championship like we touched on, which is huge in terms of the committee's eyes. It's going to be a massive feather in the cap for this Buckeyes team. And basically, if you break it down with it, a loss, there's 0 chance for this Ohio State team to make the playoffs. So it's basically either 100% or a 0%. I'd say 95% or 0% chance, either or, because they're not going to tie. So they're not going to be 5-0-1. So I think it's either 95% or 0 in terms of Ohio State's playoff chances after this game. But I'd take them pretty significantly with Ryan Day back on the sidelines for this game. He missed the last 2 due to COVID issues. What do we make of his approach to this game? What do you think he's going to try and do to really step on the throat of this Northwestern team?
I think when you've said this a few times, that Ryan Day is extremely aggressive. So I think that he's going to put the tone out there, say, hey, we're going to score points, whether that's going for it on 4th down, maybe faking a punt or being extremely aggressive in offensive play calling, maybe just right off the bat going for a deep shot and say, hey, Chris Olave, I think you can beat these guys. I just think that he's going to go from the very get-go trying to score points immediately, not working these long drives. And then if they get one stop, they're going to try it again. So I just think it's extreme aggression, and I think there'll be some tactics to make Peyton Ramsey uncomfortable on the other side of the ball, because they know he is susceptible to turning the ball over.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting for sure. I think the coin toss in this one is going to have a huge implication on the game as well, because if you're Northwestern, I'm not so sure I'm deferring if I win the coin toss, because you've seen Ohio State go out and hang 14 points on people like it's nobody's business. And so I think you'd be hard to convince me to defer and allow those first couple scripted plays for Justin Fields and Ryan Day and all of these playmakers out on the field. But with that being said, if you don't defer, and you give Ryan Day that option to work with that like kind of halftime turnover that we've talked about, I'm not sure anyone does it better than him. I've talked about this on the show to begin with. So a real cat and mouse game of, are you going to send Justin Fields out there first, or are you going to try and set the tone, set the pace, have a long drive to start with Northwestern, and take your chances of Ohio State essentially getting a free stop at the end of the half. So I think some really interesting things here to touch on. It's going to be a great game regardless of what happens. Northwestern can flat out play football, but Ohio State I think is the better team in this one. It's going to take place at noon Eastern time on Fox. Big Ten championship. Number 3 Ohio State. Number 14 Northwestern. Just another tremendous conference title. Top 15 matchup to break down. Whew, we're still going. All right, I think that's 3. Yeah, we've done 3. So we got 4 more left. Number 10, Oklahoma versus number 6, Iowa State, the Big 12 championship game. We gave a little hinting that that's going to take place in Dallas, AT&T Stadium. Noon Eastern again on ABC, so 2 tremendous noon games to start your day off with both Ohio State and this Oklahoma team against Iowa State, Oklahoma favored at 66.5%, and the line is in favor of them with 5.5, even though they are number 10 in comparison to number 6. What do you make of that first off?
I'm not sure what to make of it. I think they're both playing their best football of the year right now, which is always a good thing going into one of these type of games. I think that Oklahoma can put up more points offensively, but not Ohio State. I have the Buckeyes on my mind. The Cyclones can really limit you defensively, and they did beat Oklahoma earlier in this year. So if I'm them, like I said about Notre Dame, I'd use this as motivation. And Oklahoma is largely the same team. They just have gotten better as Spencer Rattler's got more experience. So I think this is fairly appropriate. I think that it's a little generous to the Sooners, and maybe that's just brand appeal. And they know they're playing well, but if I'm the Cyclones, I use this as motivation 100% because we've beaten this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on the growth and the consistency out of Spencer Rattler the last few games. I think when you look at his stats, he has 7 interceptions, but I'd bet house money that most, if not all of them, that came in the first 4 or 5 games of their season. He was a little bit shell-shocked, I think, in the beginning, but his growth under
Lincoln Riley.
Thank you. I was going to say Bill for some reason, but Lincoln Riley has been tremendous. You've seen Lincoln Riley time and time again develop these quarterbacks, even within a short amount of time in some of these Jalen Hurts scenarios and things like that. But with that being said, I think there's something to say about this trio that Iowa State has on offense, and let's touch on them first.
Yeah, so Iowa State brings a great trio, and I'd even say it might be a quartet. They've got Brock Purdy's leading the way as their quarterback with 196 of 296, 2,272 yards, 17 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And like Rattler, most of his interceptions were early in the season. Breece Hall, we talked about as a fringe Heisman contender, 222 carries, 1,357 yards, and 17 touchdowns. Wide receiver Xavier Hutchinson, 50 catches, 612 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And I think one of their more trusted receivers is Charlie Kolar. He's a tight end, and he's one of the best tight ends in the country. So they're promising on offense. I think that Lincoln Riley just brings an element of youth and dynamism, but Matt Campbell does the exact same thing for Iowa State, and it's an interesting matchup just head coaching-wise. And I think both of them have NFL offers, and it's interesting to see how this rivalry of young head coaches in the Big 12 will continue.
So let me pose a scenario. If you're Oklahoma, how do you kind of approach this game defensively? Are you going to try and limit Breece Hall and allow him to not run all over you and try and make Brock Purdy beat you with his arm and make Iowa State one-dimensional in that aspect of things? And if that's the case, do you think Brock Purdy is able to beat them that way?
I think that has to be the approach for Oklahoma, but like you said, Brock Purdy's more than capable. So I think you have to say, hey, Brock Purdy, you got to beat us. We're not letting Breece Hall beat us. But that might bite them in the butt, and I think there might be in-game tactics and maybe some zoning up and spying Hall, or there's going to be some in-game chess battles between these two head coaches, especially. And I know Lincoln Riley's an offensive mind, but I think there's going to be some interesting adjustments on the defensive side of the ball for the Sooners. when defending against this quartet of playmakers for the Cyclones, because it's a pick your poison, and that's something that's uncomfortable for Oklahoma, because usually they're like, oh, Kyler Murray's out there, we're just going to outscore him. And very few teams have been able to put up the points, but Iowa State has that capacity, and they've shown it time and time again.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's very interesting to see. The last time that I think we previewed an Oklahoma game was when they were taking on Oklahoma State, and I said I'm not sure Oklahoma's defense was going to be able to make enough plays to hang in this game, but then they went off and had one of the better performances I've seen out of Oklahoma in a long time in that game. So I'm hesitant to say that again, of saying, like, I'm not sure Oklahoma has the defensive capabilities to stop this Iowa State team. I just think there's so many weapons that you have to account for that gives them a unique challenge that they haven't faced except the first time these two teams played, in which Iowa State won. So I think it's very interesting to look at that aspect of things, but I think it's almost more interesting to look at Iowa State defensively and how they kind of approach this game, because they kind of hang their hat on their defense here in the Big 12, in terms of the Iowa State program, that is. So I think it's very interesting to talk about their approach as to how they're going to try and slow down Spencer Rattler and how he's been looking recently, because he's been looking flawless.
Yeah, no, that's a schematic game, because the air raid offense that Lincoln Riley's put into this Oklahoma team, there's no obvious answer that's been exposed other than when they play in the college football playoff, their defense isn't good enough. There's still not an offensive issue. I mean, eventually you play catch up too much, and then it causes interceptions down the road because it's one dimensional, only throwing. But I just don't foresee that happening in this one. So do you play zone? Do you play man? There's a lot of things that I'm looking forward to see that between this chess match between Lincoln Riley and Matt Campbell, especially on this side of the ball where it's Lincoln Riley's offense, Matt Campbell's defense, the two things that they're most known for. And I'm not sure what the approach is, but last time Oklahoma was up 30-23, and then Iowa State pulled it out 37-30. And I think it's one of those type of swings where one big stop can lead to a snowball of effects. And this game, I think one big play can be the difference. So whoever has a turnover, whoever can create a big play with their defense, a third down sack, just timely actions. And I think that both these teams will be opportunistically hunting those.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head again with how, if whoever's defense performs better is going to have a tremendous leg up in this one, because both offenses are going to be able to perform and score. So that's the Big 12 championship game. It's going to take place in Dallas, noon Eastern time on ABC. It's going to be just another fabulous. It's a top 10. It's a sleeper top 10 in the college football playoff contention rankings. It's just another sleeper game that you kind of just look at it like, oh, probably neither team has a chance to play for the college football playoff. But when you break it down, this would be our game of the week and any other week other than this week. So it's just a tremendous matchup. And
I just want to put one little thing in is we saw Iowa State with 2 losses move up into the rankings at number 6. And if Texas A&M's not playing this game, say Iowa State were to win this game and Ohio State were to lose, for instance, I think there is a chance that an Iowa State team could sneak in just based on where the committee's put them now. I don't think anything changes if they win this game, obviously. So, I mean, they'll need some fortune, but they certainly will be playing with the college football playoff in mind. Absolutely. And I think that is something that could really help. Like Oklahoma could think the same thing. Hey, if we beat the number 6 team in the country, we're number 10, we could get up to 4. Whether that's true or not, I just think that these teams are going to come out extremely motivated, more so than just for the Big 12. I think they have bigger aspirations down the road.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what you touched on. I think Iowa State is, as the committee's proven, that they view them as a legitimate contender. So a huge matchup here in terms of everything on the line for these two Big 12 schools. Moving on to the last of the Power 5 conference championship games. We have Oregon surprisingly taking on number 13 USC for the Pac-12 championship game. It's going to be Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. USC's only given a slight edge in this one. That surprised me, at least. 56.9% chance to win the game, and then the line set at -3 in favor of the Trojans. We've touched on that there's going to be talent in droves of both sides of the ball. These are the two teams in the Pac-12 that recruit the best. They're the pedigrees of the league, in my opinion. You have LA and you have Oregon, and you have the uniforms, the flash, the Nike, all of these things just drawing people to both of these programs. What do we make of this game in terms of where USC is, as well as can Oregon do enough to play spoiler against this Trojan team?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like you said, these are the two powerhouse teams in the conference. It's funny because you feel like USC is the old school program that has such an allure due to tradition, and they play new school air raid under Graham Harrell, and Oregon under Mario Cristobal has got all these flashy uniforms that appeal to the young guys, and then they play ground and pound football. I think that's interesting, and I wonder if they either of these two teams change their MOs entering this game, because both teams have so much talent but have both underperformed. And this game, you can't underperform if you're either team, because the winner of this game typically goes to the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl this year is the college football playoff, one of the semifinals, but they still get a New Year's Six. The winner of Pac-12 gets a New Year's Six. So there's extremely high stakes for this game. And USC, even though they're undefeated and somehow have a nearly 50% chance, according to some metrics, of making the college football playoff, they've underperformed in at least three of their games where they've played poorly and snuck it out at the end. I mean, Arizona State week 1, they got a tip drill, fourth down touchdown, onside kick, touchdown. Good job, you executed it. And then they snuck out against Arizona, who just lost by 63 points. And then they just beat – I mean, that was hilarious to say. They just lost by 63 points, but USC barely snuck by them. And I'm a Pac-12 guy, so I'm rooting for the Pac-12, but it's just hard for me to see that a team making it. But in their minds, they got to think, hey, if we take care of business in this game and not have one of those weird games where we play terribly for 53 minutes and come play great for 7 minutes, I mean, the chance is there. So I expect the Trojans to come out sharp and Slovis to play one of his better games, just because this Oregon defense had so much talent if everyone came back, but they didn't. And it's shown. And Oregon's lost their last 2 games. So it's a pretty weird dynamic, because Oregon's coming off of a lot of rest and poor performances, thought they were out of it, and now they're thrust into it and have a chance to make the Rose Bowl even after a pretty poor season by their standards.
Yeah, I think what you just said there at the end is why I think Oregon really competes in this football game. They lost to Oregon State, their in-state rival. It's not labeled the Civil War anymore, but it's still a tremendously important game to both programs. That's heartbreaking to all Oregon fans to have that happen. They then come out and lose again, and all the wind is just flat out of their sails. They lost to Cal. I'm sorry, it took me a while to remember who they lost to, and Cal's bad. So you look at this and you look at this Oregon team and you're just like, what is happening here? They were playing without any heart, any passion on both sides of the football. Tyler Shuck has been pretty average, I would say, is generous in terms of his performance this year. And they have a trio of backs that are just super good and super talented. So we've touched on the talent, but then you have this team that was just down and out. They were flat out just done. They didn't want to be playing anymore. And now they're thrust into this scenario of they get a chance to go upset USC and win a Pac-12 championship. They're second in a row. I just think you can't expect that team to come out flat. They're going to be so excited to be there. They're going to be ready to go. And like you touched on, it's going to be a New Year's Six berth if they win. And I think once you lose that game to Oregon State and then follow it up with a loss to Cal, you're happy if you even play for a bowl game. And so it's just now you have the scenario of this is a marquee matchup and a chance to get an even bigger one if we win. So just expect this team to really come out ready to play. That's where I'll leave that for now. But let's talk about CJ Verdell. I've said this a couple times now on this show, and he has 65 carries for 285 yards. What do they need to do in this game to get this guy more involved? Because I believe he is their best offensive player.
No, I agree. I mean, he's got more carries than Travis Dye, but Travis Dye has more yards per carry and touchdowns. I think it's interesting because why would you go away from a guy? I know they have BB Likio and Dye, but Verdell's been there. This is his 3rd year, and he's a great player. He's got big play potential. He grinds it out, and he can catch out the backfield. But they're going away from him, and I don't think that hasn't been part of the issue for them. I think that they've got a lot of talent and that they may be misutilizing. And then the other thing that's interesting to me is I would assume that opponents are going to play up in the box and take away the run game and make the inexperienced Tyler Shuck throw the ball. but they haven't done so. And Oregon has been able to establish the run game and score points through the run game, but they just haven't used C.J. Verdell. And I wonder if something we don't know about is going on. But if Oregon wants to compete in this game especially, I think they need to establish him because he is their best player offensively. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I think it's just really interesting because when you look at what Joe Moorhead did, the offensive coordinator up there at Oregon now, when he was at Penn State, he had Saquon Barkley, and he made that entire offense run through him and make him be the best player on the field. And so and they put him in scenarios that made him shine in that aspect of things. So it's a little bit confusing to me to see him now go to Oregon where you have C.J. Verdell, who, like, I just think you look at his performances year in and year out in the last 3 years, like you touched on, and he's their best back. He's their best player. And so just the inability to get him in space, get him the right reads, and I think a lot of that probably has to do with the lack of experience of Tyler Shuck, and just maybe some hardships reading the read options and the things like that Oregon really trademarked under Marcus Mariota and then still ran with Justin Herbert, who wasn't really that athletic. Well, no knock on him, but like not the best running quarterback that Oregon's ever had. And so I just think you really need to expose that in this game. If there's a week to figure that out, it's this week, to run the read option, get Shuck's legs involved because he's a capable runner. And so I just think him being able to make that happen is going to give Oregon a chance to win this game. And if they can't do that, if they can't run the ball, they're going to just get blown out, I think, by USC, quite frankly, because USC is going to get stops and then they're going to score.
Yeah, and USC has probably first or second best run defense in the Pac-12. So I think there needs to be some, not trickeration, just proper reads in the read option, because if you can allow some runs that go up the middle for Verdell, but you play off of his presence and run Shuck, like you said, he's fast. He's a good runner. And at this point in his career, he's a better runner than he is a thrower in my eyes. And so I think USC is going to stack the box and say, hey, we've got really talented secondary. We always do. Especially their safeties, Palamau and Hufanga are phenomenal. And I expect both of them to be first team all Pac-12. And I think they're going to let those guys go to work and play center field and do what they want. So Oregon, has to find a way to figure out their identity, have some trick plays up their sleeve, make some easy reads. Even though they do this a lot on third down, where they have a big tight end and they take just like a two-step rollout and dump it off. Not many guys want to go tackle a 6'7", 280 dude who used to be a defensive end. And you run that to be simple but effective. And you don't want to let USC get you in stops and down in distance and make you throw, because if you start turning the ball over against USC, you're going to lose. And Tyler Shuck has 4 interceptions on the year in 5 games. So I think he needs to play one of his best games, if not his best game of the year, for Oregon to have any chance, considering Keaton Slovis is only getting better and all the weapons USC has offensively.
Yeah, let's touch on those weapons quick. You got Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyler Vaughn's all on the outside. Just tremendous trio of wide receivers, the best in the Pac-12 in my opinion. Keaton Slovis is getting the ball to them more consistently as well. So that's problematic for this Oregon secondary that lost so many All-American pieces out of that secondary that all opted out. And I think a huge part of this is Diamador Lenore. He's the only one that came back from that All-American secondary to play these type of games, to play in these scenarios of, I'm going to be locked up on Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I need to take him out of the game. I need to, quite frankly, say I'm a better cover corner than he is a possession wide receiver. So I think that's a huge factor in this one, is that matchup between Lenore and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But with that being said, I'm not sure the rest of the Oregon secondary is enough to cover Drake London and Tyler Vaughn's, not to mention the other talented wideouts that come in to spell these guys, as well as trying to stop Veve Malepeai, as well as Stephen Carr and all of these other ball carriers that they have. It's just a tough task for Oregon defensively, so they're really going to need to be able to put up points like we touched on.
Yeah, and I think Oregon has, even though they lost such a talented secondary, probably the best in the entire nation, we've said that before, they still have the talent to make plays. Verone McKinley is a really good player. And then I think they need to pass rush Slovis. Slovis is very comfortable in the pocket. He's rarely hit. And he, even without being hit, he's had 4 interceptions in 5 games too. I mean, he hasn't been perfect. He's just played well in big moments. And I mean, credit to him in that sense. But I mean, we kind of expected more from Slovis. So I think you need a big day out of Kayvon Thibodeau. I think he needs to come around and hit Slovis, make him uncomfortable, make him move in the pocket. And I think the comfort of Slovis, because Malapea is a really good running back, but I don't think USC wants to rely on the run game against Oregon. I think they'd rather throw against the secondary. So I think they might bring some blitz packages and see what Mario Cristobal and company dial up to make Slovis uncomfortable, because I think that may be their best chance in this game, is hoping for some turnovers and then run the ball opportunistically with Joe Moorhead's read option offense.
Absolutely. I think Kayvon Thibodeau really presented himself in the Pac-12 championship last year against Utah. It was really his statement-making game, and presented him as one of the better pass rushers in the country. And he really needs to not only do that again, I think he might need to have a better game. I think he needs to really own whatever tackle he's matched up against. And I think exactly like you touched on, they have to operate those inside linebackers, Sewell, and I'm blanking on the other one's name, but they need to get creative with their blitz packages and really bring the pressure to Slovis, because if Slovis is uncomfortable, that's when he doesn't perform his best. If he's comfortable and he knows that his guys are going to be open and he has the time to find them, he's almost impossible to stop. So with that being said, I think you're going to have to heat him up. You're going to have to make him uncomfortable, and that would also give Oregon a chance to compete in this one. But I think all of those things that we touched on have to go together kind of to allow these Ducks to really have a fighting chance against the Trojans here in the Pac-12 championship game. A side note to add, this game is happening in the Los Angeles Coliseum. It's not necessarily a huge factor because there's not going to be a crowd, but it's still home field advantage for USC, which is something that isn't often the case in terms of Pac-12 championship games. So another interesting side note to add there, in the Coliseum, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Fox, Friday night, to get your weekend started off on the right foot. That's going to do it for the Power 5 conference championship games, but there's still two more tremendous football games that need to be talked about, because at least two of the teams playing have outside looks at the college football playoff if you break it down. And why not start in the Sun Belt with number 19 Louisiana taking on number 12 Coastal Carolina. We've talked about Coastal Carolina a ton this year. At first, it was kind of a joke with them just being this tremendous Cinderella story. And now here we are with the chance for them to win their conference. They're ranked number 12, and to have another trademark statement win over a Louisiana team who, let's not forget, week 1 beat Iowa State, who's now 6th in the rankings. So let's not forget about some of these things that this Louisiana team has done. Louisiana traveling to Conway, South Carolina to take on Coastal. What do you make of this fun matchup here in the Sun Belt?
Well, Coastal, we did start out as a nice little that's fun, but they are no joke. They played a heck of a game against BYU, and I think that was a perfect game for preparation in terms of playing this Louisiana team, because they've played the high level athletes that you're not necessarily used to playing in the Sun Belt. In playing BYU, they dealt with Zach Wilson, who was probably the 3rd or 4th best quarterback in the nation. And then they dealt with Tyler Algier and Dax Milne. I think that their defense is super well prepared for what Louisiana is throwing at them, and led by Levi Lewis. Levi Lewis was 165 of 275, 2,128 yards, 17 touchdowns, but 7 interceptions. And I think that's something Coastal will really be looking to capitalize on, is making him throw more interceptions, because they like to bring pressure. They like to get after you. And I think that's an interesting matchup there. And then another player that's very heavily banked on is Elijah Mitchell for Louisiana, 122 carries, 751 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And I think Coastal is super well prepared for this game, because they just played a team that also was vying for New Year's Six and college football playoff berth. And I'm really high on this Coastal team just all together.
Absolutely. I think there's just a ton to be said about how Coastal is able to perform with such an undersized offensive line. They use that as motivation and really blow people off the ball. So I would be very, very surprised if Louisiana is going to be able to stop this run game for Coastal Carolina, especially when BYU wasn't able to do so. I think BYU's probably got a little bit more pieces on their front seven than this Louisiana team. But with that being said, Louisiana is still going to score. I don't necessarily think Coastal Carolina's defense is going to be able to shut them out in any terms of imagination. I think Coastal's probably the better team in this game, I guess I will say. And so this is tremendously big for both these schools. It's probably going to land one of them in a New Year's Six bowl, depending on what happens between our next previewed matchup between Tulsa and Cincinnati. And So yeah, it's just so much on the table. And what do you make of this Coastal Carolina defense and what they're going to have to do against this Louisiana offense?
Yeah, no, I think what they're going to have to do is limit the running ability of Levi Lewis and Elijah Mitchell, and I think they're in good standing because they played Zach Wilson. They've played an elite quarterback and they won. So I think they're in really good standing. I think the linebackers, the mulleted men, as I made that one up and I was happy about that. I think that those guys need to lead this Coastal defense and rally the troops again. Gallagher was great against BYU, and I really hope he can do so again. I think that on offense they need to play well too, because Louisiana's defense is also really good. They only give up 22 points per game. Coastal gives up 18 or 19 roughly, and I think this is going to be a defensive matchup because both these teams score electrically, but the over/under is only about 55, and that just is a testament to how good both these teams' defenses are. And I think whoever limits their turnovers should be favored in this game. And so far, Coastal has limited their turnovers excellently, led by McCall. Grayson McCall is he's thrown 23 touchdowns, and entering last week, he only had one interception. So, and then he played a very good BYU defense and passed with flying colors.
Absolutely, yeah. I just think it's very interesting to look at this Coastal team because after they beat BYU, they went on to play Troy, and they had to score late to win that game. A very bad performance against that Troy team. Not to take anything away from Troy, but that's a team that Coastal should have handled it a little bit better, in my opinion. So I think it's very interesting. But this is a true home game for Coastal Carolina. They're playing on their home field, the teal turf, as a lot of people like to call it. There are going to be fans in the stands. It's not going to be a sellout in any stretch of the imagination, but you saw it against the BYU. In the BYU game, there were fans there. They were loud. They were rowdy. And it's going to be for this time around. It's going to be for a championship. So I think it's hard to bet against Coastal Carolina in this game. But with that being said, I do think Louisiana has the pieces to get it done if Coastal has some slip-ups. Like we touched on, that's going to be for the Sun Belt Championship, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN. Number 19 Louisiana versus number 12 Coastal Carolina. Our last preview for you all this evening is number 23 Tulsa taking on number 9 Cincinnati. This is a team we've touched on a lot this year. We've talked about how they're probably the best Group of 5 team. I do still think that is very much the case. I do think they're the best Group of 5 team. They've had their last few games canceled due to COVID issues, so they haven't been able to play. They actually haven't played a game since 11/21 when they squeaked by UCF 36-33 in a thriller there between two Group of 5 powerhouses. So I think there's going to be some issues early on in this game for Cincinnati, a little bit of rust. But with that being said, this Tulsa team played on the 3rd of December, and so they've had a week off to prepare for this Cincinnati team, and they beat Navy 19-6 their last time out. So what do we make of this game between these two programs for the American Athletic Conference Championship?
I mean, it's stunning that we talked about Coastal pretty much every week for like a month or so, and we just haven't seen them for over a month or almost a month, 30 days. And I just think that the Cincinnati team was on such a roll. It'll be interesting to see if they can bring it back. It's in particular Desmond Ridder, their quarterback. They're multifaceted offense. He runs the ball really well, and that's probably the main weapon. But he also was getting into a groove throwing the ball. And Tulsa has a decent defense, nothing spectacular, but I think the advantage still lies with Cincinnati's defense. I don't think that they'll lose any of that advantage with time off. I think offensively they may be less sharp, but that defense was full of ball hawks, and they'll cause problems for Tulsa. So I think they need to have a defensive identity in this game, led by head coach Luke Fickell. He's a tough dude. I think he's going to be really aggressive in play calling defensively, and then with that potentially good field position and maybe forcing turnovers, this Cincinnati offense will click into gear. So I'm not horribly concerned about rust, but I think it would be more offensively than defensively if there were to be rust.
I think so as well. I think I would be a little bit more worried if it wasn't against this Tulsa team that likes to slow the pace down offensively. They only average 25 points per game offensively, and they like to run the football. They average over 150 yards per game running. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if Cincinnati's run defense, which has been stout all year long, is able to kind of nullify this Tulsa attack and make them do something that they quite frankly don't want to do, which is throw the ball. Zach Smith is the quarterback for Tulsa. He's 108 of 187 on the year, 1,400 yards passing, 11 TDs to 6 interceptions. So there's been some issues of taking care of the football in this for this Tulsa team. But with that being said, they still have playmakers all on their offensive side. They have a ton of guys that have they have 3 guys that have over 60 carries offensively. So they spread the wealth. It's not going to be a one-man show in the backfield for Tulsa. And then they have 3 guys over 25 catches. So they spread the wealth throwing the ball around as well. So let's not limit this Tulsa team as to what they can do offensively, but this is definitely their hardest game of the season against the Cincinnati defense that has stifled teams such as why am I blanking? SMU, Houston, some of Memphis, some of these teams that are known for prolific offense in the American. I think if you look at this though, UCF put a lot on tape that you can expose Cincinnati on, and I think that's going to be really interesting to see if Tulsa is able to, with that week off, to capitalize on some of that time to prepare for this one and put a good performance on the field against this Cincinnati team. What else do you think about this one?
I think you brought up a good point there that UCF presented issues for Cincinnati, but I think they're extremely different in DNA of Tulsa and UCF. UCF has Dylan Gabriel, a very throw-happy quarterback who's got a missile for an arm, and you talked about how Tulsa likes to run the ball. I think whoever is able to establish their identity more on this game, whereas we talk about Cincinnati being ball hawks in the secondary, if they can make Tulsa throw, Tulsa may throw willingly early and try to use some of that UCF tape early, but they're going to eventually revert to who they are when times get tough. I think that's just kind of who it is, and I think Cincinnati's got more of a strong identity of who they are. They've got more versatility offensively, and their defense is stout even up front, even though we talk about how good their secondary is. I just wonder about early in this game, can Tulsa take advantage of potential rust enough to get an advantage that is insurmountable or tough to surmount? And I'm curious to see how Cincinnati comes out offensively. Do they try to throw the ball, or do they just run the ball with Jared Dokes and Desmond Ridder? And there's some questions to see of how this time off has benefited them game plan wise, because they've had tons of time to plan for Tulsa as well.
Yeah, I think if you're Tulsa though, you're going to expect them to try and run the ball. So I think their game plan has to be stopping the run. We've touched on how Ritter's able to a capable carrier of the football. He's 11 touchdowns rushing this year. He only has 16 passing, so it's almost an even split in terms of his production with his legs rather than his arm. But that being said, I think if you're Tulsa, you just have to make him beat you in the passing game. I think, but this is a team that a lot of those a lot of those rushing yards come from broken down pass plays. And when he's able to scramble out of the pocket and beat you with his legs when you have everyone else in the secondary covered. So I think that's a huge impact in this game, is they're going to have to probably leave a guy to spy him a couple times on these passing downs, because if he sees straight up man coverage and just all defensive backs with their backs to him running down the field, he's going to take off and run and get 15 yards easy. So I think that's a huge aspect for Tulsa as well, and not necessarily just selling out on stopping the pass in some of these obvious passing situations, because he's going to just break your back with QB scrambles to convert longer third downs if they get to that with 3rd and 11, 12, 13, stuff like that. So a huge impact as well there for Ridder. I think he needs to have a tremendous game. I think he needs to really prove himself and prove to the Cincinnati team that they're still legit. They haven't played in a while, but they're still a very legit contender. And I do think they are the only group of 5 team that has a chance to make the college football playoffs. So I think with that being said, there's still so much on the line in this game. Group of 5 berth in the New Year's Six Bowl, things like this that can really make or break your program. Luke Fickell is doing an amazing job, and anything like that would be huge for this program to get that exposure and things like that, and have a considerable shot to make the college football playoff. At least they should, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think there's something you brought up there is third down efficiency both ways is huge. Cincinnati's elite on defense. They don't let. I mean, I watched the SMU game and I watched the Memphis game. I watched the UCF game, and in 2 of those 3, the UCF. I mean, not the UCF. UCF excluded Memphis and SMU. they couldn't convert a third down, and they had great quarterbacks. Shane Buechele and Brady White are both really good at spreading the ball around, and they couldn't convert anything. So if they get into down and distance for Tulsa, I think it's a tough sledding. I think you can't have down and distance if you're Tulsa against this Cincinnati team who's so opportunistic and so aggressive. I think that and then conversely, that Cincinnati typically has third and short. So in those times where you talk about when they are third and long, it seems obvious passing downs, you have to be able to get Desmond Ridder down when he scrambles and don't allow those chunk plays, which they seem to get so often. So that's just one thing that I think will be a major determining factor in this game.
Yeah, I agree. Once again, that's number 23 Tulsa taking on number 9 Cincinnati for the American Athletic Conference Championship. It's going to take place at 8 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. It's going to be a tremendous way to close out your night. I know it's going to be the same time as Alabama, Florida, but make sure to be flipping back and forth between the two. Tremendous football is going to be happening in this game as well, with a team in Cincinnati that is desperate for that exposure and things like that to prove that they're still a legitimate contender in this season. So a tremendous slate of games that we've previewed for you all. With that being said, we do need to pick some of these games. We've touched on a lot of them. I see Leaf is going to the document and changing some of his picks after these previews. So we love to see that. I'll probably flip-flop back and forth with what I've heard and what I've shared, some of this information. So we're going to pick all of the conference championship games. There's 10 of them. And then we will pick one extra game, which is going to be Texas A&M at Tennessee. A lot riding on the table for Texas A&M, so we can't leave them out this week. They are playing a game, so we can't leave them out in this aspect of things. And Tennessee's kind of scary. So we're going to start things off. We'll go pretty much in chronological order of when these games are going to happen. We'll start off on Friday night, CBS Sports Network, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The Ryan Conference USA Championship between the University of Alabama, Birmingham at Marshall. Who you got?
I'm going with Marshall. I liked what I saw from them earlier in the season. Plus, you can say we are Marshall. The Thundering Herd are cool. And I just think that they're a better team altogether. I haven't watched a lot of UAB, but I've liked what I've seen from Marshall, and they're a gritty team. They've destroyed some teams, and they've proven that they can win some close games as well. So I'm rolling with Marshall.
Yeah, I'm going to go Marshall as well. UAB is just one of those teams that hasn't done enough for me when Marshall's been ranked a couple times so far this season. So, I mean, it's just one of these teams that we were talking about Marshall as well as Coastal Carolina, that pretty much that entire run that Coastal made. Marshall was right there behind them in the polls. So I think Marshall lost a pretty inexplicable game. I've been completely blanking on who it was to. But with that being said, I am going to take the Thundering Herd and say we are Marshall as well. And we'll see what happens there to start off this conference championship weekend in style, 7 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network. 30 minutes after that one kicks, we get another conference championship to kick off on ESPN. The MAC Conference Championship is at 7:30 p.m. Ball State versus Buffalo. Buffalo undefeated on the season, one of the only undefeated teams left. I think there's 6 or 7. So who you got in this one?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Buffalo to continue that. They run the ball incredibly. Just a few weeks ago, there was 8 touchdowns by a single player for Buffalo. I just think that their run game is too much in this game. So I'm going with the Buffalo Bulls, not the Bills, the Bulls.
Yeah, did you see that play last weekend for Ball State though, when they had their entire team on the field during that scramble drill?
That was incredible. That was almost like the Stanford Cal big game of 1984.
Yeah, exactly. And if it weren't for an illegal forward pass and that's kind of scramble, which was very close, I think it went forward about a yard and it was entirely across the field. Ball State might not be playing in this game because their entire team ran on the field and then they gave up a touchdown. So super intriguing play. Look it up. It was one of the crazier ones of the year, in my opinion, even though it didn't count. But I'm going to go Buffalo as well. I think it says something to be undefeated throughout your entire conference schedule. So I'll roll there with Buffalo as well at 7:30 Eastern time p.m. on Friday night, ESPN. The nightcap, I guess it's a nightcap. It's another 30-minute delay. Another game will kick off on Fox. That is the Pac-12 championship game, Oregon at number 13, USC. What do you make of this matchup and who you got in it?
I think you brought up a good point that Oregon will be rejuvenated to play this game just because they thought they were dead and now they're alive and very much alive, rather fortunately. That said, I just think that USC has more to play for than even Oregon does, and they're better. I think that I'm always typically when I have a tough time deciding, I go for quarterback play, and I think that Slovis is a lot better than Shuck, and I also think that USC hasn't played their best football yet, and I think this is one of those games where they're going to say, hey, we have such a pedigree to protect. We might have a chance at the playoff. We're going to play better, and I think their defense has an extra gear that we haven't seen either. And I just don't see that Oregon has that presence offensively that they've had in years past, whether it be Justin Herbert or Mariota. I just don't see it. So I'm going with USC. I think it'll be a close game, though, and it'll be one of those games where whoever makes more plays, because both teams have elite playmakers on both sides of the ball.
I like that. I like your comparison between the quarterbacks. I think that's going to play a huge factor in this. I don't know if Shuck's going to be able to make enough plays to win the game for Oregon. But another thing that I think about when I'm having a hard time deciding on what to do and what to pick is coaching. And I quite frankly think that Mario Cristobal, Joe Moorhead, people like this and company just do a better job preparing their people to play than
Clay Helton.
Not working. Clay Helton. Jeez Louise. We've talked about way too many teams in this episode to try and remember all this stuff. Anyway, Clay Helton has just really struggled to have his team ready to go in some of these big scenarios, and I think that's going to play a factor in this. I think USC definitely has the more talent, but I just think these guys at Oregon are going to be rejuvenated, ready to go. They did not think they were going to be here. And I just think you're going to see them play with a ton more heart and passion than you saw in their last few games. So I'm going to go with the Ducks and to pull this upset over the USC. And quite frankly, just because I haven't been still impressed by USC yet this year. So I'm going to go with the Ducks to win the Pac-12 in a year that they probably shouldn't have even been in there playing.
I think that it subconsciously contributes to me in this pick. I haven't been impressed by USC either, but I can't say in my head like, oh, Oregon's the Pac-12 champion. Like, yeah, that's at the beginning of the year, that makes sense, but they just haven't been good. Even in games they've won, they haven't been good.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. It's a tough one for me, but I need to get one back on you, so I think that's a good enough place to try and start. With that being said, let's move on to Northwestern and Ohio State. This is number 14 Northwestern against number 4 Ohio State. Big Ten championship game on Fox, noon Eastern time. I think we're pretty much going to be consistent in this one. Who you got in this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Ohio State. They're just going to put too many points on the board. Even if they do make mistakes, I just don't see a way that Northwestern can put the same amount of points up that Ohio State easily can. So I'm going Ohio State, and I think it'll be fairly comfortable.
Yeah, I'm going to go Ohio State as well. You saw them put up 45 points still against that Indiana team, and Fields threw 3 interceptions. So I just don't necessarily see a way that Northwestern can score 45 points ever in a game. So I'm going to roll with not to maybe they do. I don't know. But with that being said, I'm just going to roll with the explosiveness of Ohio State in this one with the playmakers on offense to be able to score more than Northwestern, as well as Northwestern defends and runs the ball and controls the clock. I still think when Ohio State gets the ball, they're probably going to score. So I'll roll with the Buckeyes in this one. We touched on we needed to talk about Texas A&M. It is now the time to do so. They're the number 5 team in the country. They're not playing for a conference championship, but they do have a matchup against a good Tennessee team who played hard against Florida the weekend before they lost to LSU. That's kicking off at noon Eastern time as well on ESPN. Do you expect the Aggies to remain in the situation that they are in?
I think they're going to win. I just think that they're in the position to be there, and they've played good football since their loss to Alabama, and that's obviously turned out to be not a bad loss. So I think they will win. I don't think it'll be a blowout by any means. I just think that they're too solid. They run the ball really well, and they've got a veteran quarterback in Kellen Mond. So I'm going to go with the Aggies. I think that they keep themselves in the conversation. I'm not sure it'll be enough to make the college football playoff, but they're at least a New Year's Six bowl bound, and that's plenty to play for nonetheless. So I'm going with the Aggies.
Yeah, I'm going the Aggies as well. I just think there's so much at stake here for them. This is a game where they're sitting at number 5, and number 2 and number 3 play each other, as well as some other teams in these have these huge matchups. I just think you have this scenario where if Notre Dame beats Clemson again, Clemson's not going to the college football playoff. And so that would instantly slide Texas A&M into that slot. And so if they win this game, they have a very considerable chance of making it, in my opinion, which is very almost weird to say, but true. And so I think they're going to come out motivated to go. I picked against them in that Auburn game. It didn't work out well for me in that one. So I'll roll with Texas A&M to beat Tennessee in this one at noon Eastern on ESPN. All right, Big 12 title. Oklahoma against Iowa State, noon Eastern on ABC. Got a ton of good noon games. Who you got in this one?
I really have no idea on this one. I've gone back and forth a few times. I think that I mentioned I like going for the better quarterback, and this one is one of the ones where I can't decide who's the better quarterback. Brock Purdy's a veteran. He's been there, and he's played in big games, and they have a better defense. So I'm going to pick Iowa State. But that said, Spencer Rattler is so talented, and when he's comfortable, they look like a juggernaut offensively. And then Oklahoma's defense has started playing better. But I'm going to go with Iowa State. I just think that their defense is solid. They've played well of late, and they've played better competition than Oklahoma in their hot streak here. So they've beaten teams that have pushed them. They've played in closer games than Oklahoma, and I'm going to trust the veteran presence of Brock Purdy over Spencer Rattler. But that one is not one I'm confident about.
Yeah, picking against Vegas never really goes well for us, and Vegas is favoring Oklahoma in this one. But I'm going to keep it consistent with you. I'm not going to go against you on this one. I'm going to go Iowa State as well. Just quite frankly, I think they have the talent on offense to score, and I do think they have a better defense. I don't necessarily say, you know my saying, I say good offense beats good defense nowadays in college football. But with that being said, I think good offense and good defense beats good offense. So I'm going to roll with that and allow. I think Iowa State's going to try and slow the game down, though. I do think they're going to try and slow it down a little bit, limit Oklahoma's possessions, and have a similar total points that you saw in their first matchup, about each team in the 30s. I would say is pretty comfortable to bet on. I wouldn't necessarily go a ton over that, and if anything, I would go under that. So I would expect Iowa State to limit the amount of times Oklahoma and Spencer Rattler touch the ball. And with that being said, I like their odds of trying to do that with the defense and weapons on offense that they have to do that. So I'll take Iowa State to win the Big 12. Sun Belt time. Louisiana and Coastal Carolina, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. Who you got?
I got to go with Coastal. I mean, I've rolled them all year, and they haven't failed me. And I saw them play BYU. I know they didn't play a great game against Troy, but I saw them get prepared for this matchup against BYU, and they clashed with flying colors. And I think that BYU is a better team than Louisiana, especially on their offensive side of the ball. And Coastal's defense looked really good. You mentioned their offensive line being undersized but powerful. I'm going with Coastal. I just think that they take really good care of the ball and they play good defense, and that's a recipe for success. Absolutely.
I'm going Coastal as well in this one for sure. I think you saw them be able to dominate time of possession against BYU, just limit the amount of times that Zach Wilson was able to have the ball. And if you're able to do that against BYU, you're going to be able to do that against Louisiana. And so I think with that being said, Louisiana is definitely going to have their work cut out for them in this one. And Coastal Carolina, I think, has a chance to really make a statement here over this Louisiana team and win their conference, the Sun Belt. All right, Boise State versus San Jose State for the Mountain West Championship game, 4:15 p.m. on Fox. Who you got in this one?
I think I'm going with Boise State. I think that because they've got their quarterback back, their defense is healthy. Again, Hank Bachmeier, we saw that we talked about how Jack Sears, their backup quarterback, isn't a huge drop-off, but in the game they lost BYU. They lost handily with a third-string quarterback. So I just think that the veteran presence of this team, both offensively and defensively, helps them go. They've played in more big games than San Jose State has. I like the San Jose State team, but I'm going to go with the Smurf turf. I don't know if they're playing there. I don't think they are, but I like the Smurf turf, so I'm going with Boise State.
Yeah, I like that pick. I like it a lot. I think the Broncos have a ton of potential on both sides of the football. It's not just their offense; it's their defense that keeps them in games. But with that being said, I can't go against the undefeated San Jose State team. I just think it's just so impressive anytime a team can roll through a conference schedule and go undefeated. I don't give USC, quite frankly, enough credit for being able to do that in the Pac-12 in a team that in a league that just cannibalizes each other. So I'm going to roll with San Jose State and the momentum that they have. It's either at San Jose State or it's a neutral site. So I'm going to roll with I'm like 98% sure they're the Spartans, but I'm just going to roll with San Jose State.
They are the Spartans.
Yeah, I thought so. All right, I'm going to roll with San Jose State to win the Mountain West. 4:15 p.m. Kickoff on Fox. Tremendous group of 5 conference championship game is number 23 Tulsa at number 9 Cincinnati. That is going to be played in Cincinnati. I think I forgot to mention that. It's the American Conference Championship game, 8 p.m. Eastern on ABC. You got winning this one?
I love Cincinnati. I really do think that they have a claim to be the 5th or 6th best team in the country, and it's just been poor timing in terms of them not being able to play games. So I'm going with Cincinnati. I think that their defense is elite. I mentioned Notre Dame is one of the best defenses in the country. I think Cincinnati has a claim to that as well. And I think that because what they rely on is more the run game versus the pass game, that the timing of the timing of a pass game can impact the flow of an offense so much. But I think because they're so heavily reliant on their run game, it won't hurt them offensively as much as it could have. The layover that is. So I'm going Cincinnati, and I think they'll win handily. Actually, I think that they'll limit the run for Tulsa and have some big plays of their own.
Yeah, I'm going to go Cincinnati as well. I think for all those same reasons that you touched on. The rust is not as apparent if you just run the football, and I think they're going to be able to run the ball, whether it's with Desmond Ridder or their back. And I just think it's going to be very impressive to see this Cincinnati team. I think they're going to come out with a chip on their shoulder. They haven't played, but they've dropped 2 spots in the rankings. I think this is a prime time opportunity for them to really have a great performance against a good Tulsa team. So I'm going to roll with Cincinnati to win this one as well on ABC, 8 p.m. Eastern. All right, we've gotten to 2 of the best games of the week. We have number 1 Alabama taking on number 7 Florida in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium there in Atlanta. The SEC title, 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS. You can't build it up any more than we already have. Who you got winning this game?
I'm tempted to take Florida just because, I really can't. They can't play that poorly again. They played a bad game against LSU, and I really do think they'll rebound, at least offensively. They'll put up their points. I feel like that's almost a given. The reason I'm going to take Alabama, though, is I just don't think that Florida can stop them, and Alabama has a better chance of stopping Florida than Florida does of stopping Alabama. And then their defense is getting better, and it's not elite, and I would be concerned about that at a certain extent, but they have the playmakers on that side of the ball to come up with a play. And I think that's enough against Florida because Florida just defensively, frankly, isn't good at all. And so I'm going to go with Alabama. I do think it'll be closer than what the line has it. I'd take Florida on that type of plus 17, but I wouldn't be surprised if it turns into a blowout if they build a lead and then Trask is forced to just play garbage minutes and try to throw them back into the game, which can cause anything to happen.
Yeah, I think it's a really scary game for Alabama, truth be told. A thing we forgot to mention in that loss last week for Florida is that Kyle Pitts did not play. They rested him because he was banged up a couple times earlier on in the season. And so that is just a tremendous piece of that offense that was left on the sideline against LSU. What?
It bit them in the butt.
Yeah, absolutely. It totally did not turn out to be the right decision at all. And with that being said, with him in that offense, it's a completely different unit. And they were still able to score 34 points on LSU without him. And so I just think there's a lot to like about Florida trying to spring this upset. But with that being said, you look at the way Alabama has been able to pretty much dominate everyone that they've played. Just it's impossible to go against them. So I'm going to go Alabama and Nick Saban as well in this game. But I do think it's going to be closer than 17 points, which the spread indicates. I think either way, like you touched on, whether it's just a really competitive game or Trask brings them back a little bit late due to some garbage time touchdowns. But with that being said, I got Alabama in this one and I just think it's going to be so fun to watch. I cannot wait for this explosive offense because yes, good offense beats good defense, but who has the better offense is the question. So I just think there's a very legitimate conversation to be had whether or not Florida can score more. So with that being said, we are now brought to the best matchup of the week, which is why it is the game of the week. I told you it was all in chronological order. I lied. I'm a liar. This game takes place at 4 p.m. Eastern time, but
You said mostly. I got you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But we save the best for last on this show, and we always try and aspire to that. Leave you on a good note, a high note. Number 2, Notre Dame, taking on number 3, Clemson in the ACC championship game. Charlotte, North Carolina, 4 p.m. Eastern on ABC. This is the game that so many people were waiting to see. Who you got in this one, why, and what's your score?
I just love Trevor Lawrence. So I think that really is my answer to this game. That I think if DJ were to play even a round 2 in this game, I'd take Notre Dame. I think their defense is really, really phenomenal, and their offense is good enough, especially with the ball control they have. I just love Trevor Lawrence and everything he does in big games. Like as a 18 or 19-year-old, he played at Alabama team riddled with first-round talent and carved them up to the tune of a 28-point Clemson victory. And obviously there was help elsewhere, but I mean, if he can do that at that stage right now, I think he's as well equipped as any college football player has been in years. So I'm going with Trevor Lawrence. It'll be interesting. He hasn't played in a close game in a long time. Like he's killed everyone. So I'm going Clemson. I think that they won't have any turnovers, which riddled them against Notre Dame last time. And Notre Dame won't be able to run quite as much because they're going to put an emphasis of making Book beat them with his arm rather than Kyron Williams and Book's legs. So I'm going Clemson 38-27. I think it'll be competitive throughout. I just think that Clemson will be up a little bit and then distance themselves with a late touchdown.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I think Clemson does win the game, and I think that is for a couple different reasons. I think coaching is one huge one. I think if you give Clemson the opportunity to build off of the mistakes that they made in that first game, and you look at Brent Venables and Dabo Swinney, and you allow them to put on tape exactly what Notre Dame did to beat them, because let's face it, nothing changed for Clemson defensively, and nothing has changed for Notre Dame offensively. They're going to try and do the same exact things that they did to you in that first game, and you're going to be able to build off of that and create schemes and things to slow down Ian Book in this Notre Dame offense. And I think that opportunity in and amongst itself is going to be huge for this Clemson defense to have a better performance than they did the first time these two teams played. Secondly is absolutely you can't not talk about Trevor Lawrence. He's their leader back on the field. He's going to bring them together as a unit. I think when he's in there, ETN's better. And I think that's a huge part of this game is the ability to run the zone read with Travis Etienne to get him in space, as well as Trevor Lawrence to extend plays. So I just think there's too much there to build on for Clemson to come back and kind of assert themselves. And I would watch out if you're Notre Dame in this one, because if you get blown out by Clemson, you might have a sincere opportunity that you miss the college football playoff if Florida is somehow able to spring an upset over Alabama or something else crazy happens. This is a huge game because, yes, if Clemson loses, they're probably not going to the playoff. But if Notre Dame gets blasted by like 40, they might not go either with the pedigree that they've created with the committee and some poor performances in these semifinal games and things like that. So I would say really watch out for Notre Dame if they get blasted. I would be very cautious to see where they fall in the grand scheme of things. But I'm going to go before we add some more onto this. I'm going to go Clemson 42-31.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and you talk about if Florida springs an upset. I think if they get beaten by 20 or more, and it's a convincing 20, not just like it's 14 for the most part, and then a late pick six or something. I'm saying if they're beaten by 20 and then it feels like that the whole time, that they could be out even if Alabama wins, and Texas A&M could slide in, Iowa State could slide in, and the weird one is if USC were to win, that's undefeated. And you might take them. It's not, and obviously Notre Dame's a brand name, and that helps them a lot. But so is USC, and I just think that if you, like you said, you bring up a great point. They have not done well in the playoff, and I think they've done enough that even if they were to lose by 14 per se, or we both said 11, I think they're in safely in. I just think that if it becomes 20 or more, you present a really good point because there are teams that are on the outside looking in, but that have chances. We talked about it being like 95% for Ohio State getting in if they're to win. But Notre Dame, it's not that high if they're beaten at all and beaten badly would make it a serious toss up, and I'd be worried.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you see a similar game as to what happened the first time around with Clemson just beating North Carolina by in like double overtime or something crazy, which would happen in the first time around, they're both going to go because you can't leave out the Notre Dame team in that scenario. But like I said, like we both said, if they get blown out by over 20 and you have that scenario of saying, oh, with Trevor Lawrence, you're that much worse than us in the ACC, I don't know, man. It's gonna be hard to convince me that they're worthy of that scenario because let's be honest, 4 turnovers is very unlike Clemson, and it's just something that they got in that game, and Clemson still took them to double overtime. So I don't know. There's a lot to build on. We'll talk about all of it after it unfolds. But the beauty of all of this is we get to go watch it unfold now. So I'm super excited to be able to go and see all of these things transpire that we've talked about. There was a ton that went into this, so hopefully everyone appreciated all of the information, all of the previews. This is definitely going to be the best week of college football of the season. I know we have semifinal games that are going to come up, and they're going to be fun to talk about, but you just don't get this quality of football that often. So please go out and enjoy these games. Make sure to tune into teams that you don't necessarily see week in and week out, see what they have to offer. It's going to be just super fun. So that's going to do it for us. I know we went really long, and I'm sorry about that. There was just too much to talk about to leave on the table. So with that being said, that's going to do it for Leaf and I. Do you have anything else to add, Leaf, before we sign off and go watch some sports?
Yeah, just watch the games and enjoy. Stay safe, and then we'll have more content out for you both in this for the recap of all these games, and we're going to have some conference analysis for basketball to look out for as well.
Yep, absolutely. Keep your eyes peeled for those, and we will see. We're doing Friday for a conference preview for the Big Ten in basketball, so that's going to come out before some of these games do happen. So we'll see you again before these happen, but it'll be on topic of basketball. So do enjoy these. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and we will see you all on Friday.
Adios.